There are nights that carve themselves into your memory with such precision that decades later you can still smell the air, still hear the silence between the words. I've reported from battlefields and presidential palaces, witnessed history's great turns and terrible falls, but I've never forgotten one particular night in late October in a basement club on West 52nd Street when I stopped being a journalist and became simply a man who listened. That was the night Louis Armstrong showed me his wounds. I can still feel the wooden stairs beneath my shoes as I descended into that world, narrow, uneven steps worn smooth by countless feet seeking refuge in music. The club was called Minton's, though everyone just called it the Cave, and cave it was. Low ceilings stained yellow from decades of cigarette smoke. Tables crowded so close together you had to turn sideways to reach your seat. A bar that ran along the back wall, bottles catching what little light there was, casting amber shadows across the faces of men and women who'd come to forget the day they'd just survived. The air was thick, not just with smoke, though there was plenty of that, blue-gray clouds drifting lazily under the stage lights like ghosts of songs already played. But thick was something else, anticipation maybe, or exhaustion. It was past midnight that hour when the city's masks start to slip, when people stop pretending quite so hard. I'd come on impulse. A source had canceled, leaving me with a rare free evening. And I'd heard Louis was playing a residency there, away from the grand theaters and television studios where America had grown accustomed to seeing him grin and sweat and blow that golden horn. I wanted to see him in his natural element, I suppose. The reporter in me was always looking for the story beneath the story. The subway rumbled under our feet every 10 minutes, a low thunder that rattled the glasses on the tables and seemed to shake something loose in your chest. Nobody minded. It was part of the rhythm down there, part of the heartbeat of the place. Louis was on stage when I arrived, and even in that dim light, he was incandescent. White handkerchief, already soaked, draped around his neck, shirt collar open, that trumpet scarred and dented, its brass worn dull in places from the oil of his hands, pressed to his lips like a lifeline. His cheeks ballooned impossibly large, and when the notes came out, they didn't sound like music. They sounded like laughter and crying happening at the same time, like joy that had been forced to survive too many winters. He saw me. I don't know how the stage lights were in his eyes. The room was dark, but halfway through West End Blues, his gaze found mine and held it for just a moment. A flicker of recognition, a small nod, then back to the music, but something had shifted. I ordered bourbon and sat at a table near the exit sign, that eternal red glow that marked every jazz club I'd ever been in. The drink was cheap and it burned going down, and I didn't care. I wasn't there for the bourbon. I was there because even then, in 1958, I was beginning to understand that the stories that mattered most were the ones that happened in the spaces between headlines, the quiet rooms, the late nights, the moments when people forgot they were supposed to be icons. Louis played for another hour. Standards, mostly. Stardust, Georgia. Songs so familiar they'd become invisible. But the way he played them, God, the way he played them made you hear them like they'd just been written, like the ink was still wet on the sheet music. The small crowd, maybe 30 people, all of them looking like they'd been carrying the world on their backs, swayed and nodded and closed their eyes. Around 1:30, people started to leave. Slowly at first, then in a gentle exodus. Coats pulled on. Quiet thank yous to the bartender, the scrape of chair legs on the wooden floor. Louis had set down his trumpet and was wiping his face, talking quietly with the piano player. I stood to leave too, buttoning my coat, already composing the mental notes I'd file away about the experience. Cronkite. His voice cut through the thinning crowd, deep and gravelly, worn smooth by years of singing and smoking and shouting over train noise and bus engines on endless tours through the American South. I turned. He was looking directly at me, handkerchief in one hand, trumpet in the other. You got somewhere you need to be? I didn't. I told him so. Then stay a minute. It wasn't a request exactly. It wasn't a command either, somewhere in between. The voice of a man who'd learned that you don't get much in this life unless you ask for it, but who'd also learned not to expect too much when you do. The club empty. The bartender wiped down glasses, counted money, turned off the register. The piano player packed up his sheet music with the careful reverence of a man handling something holy. Even the cigarette smoke seemed to settle, hanging motionless in the air like it was waiting to see what would happen next. And then it was just the two of us, Louis Armstrong and me. A basement club in Manhattan at 2 in the morning with the city rumbling overhead and silence pressing in from all sides. He sat on a stool at the edge of the stage, his trumpet across his knees. The stage lights were off now. Only the red exit sign and a single bare bulb behind the bar gave any illumination. It made his face look older than I'd ever seen it. The lines deeper, the exhaustion more honest. "You want to know something, Walter?" he said, looking at his trumpet rather than at me. "People think they know me. They see the smile. They hear the horn. They think, that's Satchmo. He's having the time of his life." And I am, you understand? I am. But that's not all of it. That's never all of it. I pulled a chair over, sat facing him. My reporter's instinct was to reach for my notebook, but something stopped me. This wasn't an interview. This was something else entirely. I grew up in a part of New Orleans they didn't put on the postcards, he continued. Poverty so thick you could taste it. Mama working herself to the bone. Daddy gone. I learned to play this horn because it was the only thing that made sense in a world that didn't make any damn sense at all. Music was the only language that didn't lie to me. He ran his fingers along the trumpet's bell, tracing a dent I hadn't noticed before. You know how many times I've played in towns where I couldn't eat in the restaurant next to the theater, couldn't sleep in the hotel where white folks came to see me perform, counted money through a dressing room door because they didn't want me in the office? I've smiled through every bit of it, grinned and sweated, and said, wonderful, wonderful, until the words don't even mean anything anymore, because that's the price. That's what they'll pay for. The joy, the entertainment, the happy Negro with his horn. His voice didn't crack, but something in it had changed, gotten quieter, more dangerous. They wanted jazz to stay in the brothels and the dives, you know. Keep it contained, keep it small. But we wouldn't let it stay small. We took it everywhere. Made it too big to ignore, made it American whether America wanted it or not. And the cost of that, he paused, shook his head slowly. The cost is that you become a symbol. And symbols don't get to be tired. Symbols don't get to be angry. Symbols sure as hell don't get to be afraid. I found my voice. Are you afraid? He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something I'd never seen in any photograph or television appearance. I saw a man who'd carried too much for too long. I'm afraid they'll remember the smile and forget the music. I'm afraid they'll remember the entertainer and forget the artist. I'm afraid that 50 years from now, some kid will see a picture of me wiping sweat with a handkerchief and think that's all I was, a clown with a trumpet. He stood slowly, like his bones hurt, walked to the edge of the stage and sat back down on the stool there, trumpet in his hands, but mostly, he said, so quietly I almost didn't hear it, I'm afraid they'll never understand that the joy they hear is real, that it's not fake just because it costs something, that you can love this music with everything you have and still bleed from playing it. People hear the joy, they never hear the cost. The club was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. Somewhere above us, a siren wailed and faded. The city going about its business, indifferent to the conversation happening in a basement on 52nd Street. Why are you telling me this? I asked. He smiled then, but it was different from the smile the world knew. Smaller, more honest, because you're the kind of man who will remember it, right? Because I've seen you report on things that mattered and things that didn't, and you told the truth about both. And because sometimes, he stopped, gathered himself, sometimes you just need to say things out loud to another human being who will understand that you're not complaining, you're just explaining. He lifted the trumpet to his lips then, and I thought the conversation was over. But he paused. One more thing. You asked me once, years ago after a show, why I keep playing. You remember that? I did. It had been a quick question in a crowded dressing room, barely answered before someone pulled him away. I keep playing, he said, because every night there's someone in the audience who needs this music to survive. Maybe they don't even know they need it, but it reaches them. It touches something that was dying inside them and reminds them they're alive. And if I can do that for one person, just one, then all the rest of it, the hotels I can't sleep in, the restaurants I can't eat in, the exhaustion, the loneliness, the way my lips bleed after 3 sets, all of that is worth it. Because music is the only thing we have that's bigger than hate. It's the only thing that can outlive it. He raised the trumpet again, and this time he didn't stop. The first note hit me like a physical thing, not loud. He was playing quietly, intimately, like he was telling a secret, but with a weight that made my chest tight. I don't know what song it was. Maybe it wasn't a song at all. Maybe it was just Lewis talking through his horn in a language older than words. His eyes closed, his cheeks rose and fell with his breathing. The trumpet moved slightly, finding angles and positions his hands knew without thinking. And the sound, God, the sound filled that empty room like water filling a vessel, finding every corner, every crack, every space that needed filling. Each note carried memory. I could hear New Orleans in it, the funeral marches and the celebration parades. I could hear the riverboats and the speakeasies. And the first time a young boy realized that this sound, this feeling, was what he was born to do. I could hear the train cars and the bus stations and the backstage silences and the 1,000 small indignities transformed into something transcendent. It wasn't just music. It was confession. It was prayer. It was testimony. My eyes burned. I didn't wipe them. I just sat there, this veteran journalist who'd seen soldiers die and cities burn, and I let the tears come because there was nothing else to do. Louis Armstrong was showing me his soul, and the only appropriate response was to bear witness. The last note hung in the air for what seemed like forever. Then it faded, dissolved into silence, and Louis lowered the trumpet slowly. He sat there with his eyes still closed, breathing heavily, looking more exhausted than I'd ever seen any man look, "Thank you for staying," he said finally, his voice rough. "I couldn't speak. I tried, but the words wouldn't come, so I just nodded, knowing somehow that he could feel it, even with his eyes closed. We sat like that for a long time, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 20. Time had stopped meaning anything down there. Finally, Louis stood, placed his trumpet carefully in its case, the case worn and scarred by decades of travel, covered in stickers from cities and clubs and theaters across the world. He closed the latches with a soft click that sounded like finality. "You heading uptown?" he asked, and just like that, the moment was over, or not over, transformed, returned to the world of normal questions and normal conversations, but carrying the weight of what had just happened. "I'll walk with you to the subway," I said. We climbed those narrow stairs together, back up into the October night. The air outside was cold and clean, shocking after the warmth and smoke of the club. The street was empty except for a single taxi idling at the corner. Manhattan at 3 in the morning, caught between the night that was ending and the morning that hadn't quite begun. Louis pulled his coat tighter, his trumpet case in one hand. "Don't make me sound sad in whatever you write about this," he said with a small smile. "I'm not sad, I'm grateful. There's a difference. I promised him I wouldn't, and I kept that promise. For decades I kept it. I never reported on that conversation, never turned it into a story, never tried to package it into something consumable for an audience that wouldn't have understood what they were hearing. Some things aren't meant to be news. Some things are meant to be memory." We shook hands there on the sidewalk, and he walked toward the subway entrance, his silhouette disappearing down into the earth like the music had disappeared into silence. I stood there watching until he was gone, then stood there a while longer, not ready to move, not ready to let the night end. I've thought about that evening countless times over the years. In quiet moments between broadcasts, in late nights when sleep wouldn't come, in the spaces between the public work and the private life, I've thought about Louis and his trumpet and the cost of joy. I've thought about what it means to be both symbol and human, to carry America's contradictions in your chest and still find the strength to play. I never saw him alone like that again. We crossed paths at events, exchanged pleasantries, shared brief conversations in crowded rooms. He died in 1971 on a summer morning in his home in Queens, and when I heard the news, I sat at my desk at CBS and remembered that basement club, the red exit sign, the subway rumbling beneath our feet, the sound of one man's truth played on a dented trumpet in an empty room. They say Louis Armstrong was an American treasure, and he was. They say he was an ambassador of joy, and he was that too. But he was also a man who bled to give us beauty, a man who smiled through pain so deep most of us will never comprehend it, a man who understood that the only thing stronger than hate is the music we make in spite of it. I reported the news for over 30 years, told America what happened each day, signed off with those familiar words that became my signature. But that night with Louis wasn't news, it was truth. And truth is a different thing entirely, deeper, quieter, more permanent. Sometimes I wonder if he told his story to others, if there were other late nights and other clubs where he opened up and let someone see behind the smile. I hope there were. I hope he didn't carry it all alone. But whether he did or not, I carry that night with me still, the weight of what he trusted me with, the sound of his trumpet in the silence, the knowledge that I'd been allowed to witness something sacred, not a performance, not an interview, but a man's honest reckoning with himself. That was Louis Armstrong, not the icon, not the symbol, not the grinning face on album covers, but the man underneath, the artist who gave everything he had and never stopped giving, who transformed pain into something beautiful, because that's what artists do. They take what breaks them and make it into something that heals us. And that's the way it was. That's the way it will always be, in my memory. A cold October night, a basement club, a trumpet's confession, and two men sharing a moment of truth in a world that rarely makes space for such things. I'm grateful I stayed. I'm grateful he asked. I'm grateful I was there to hear it.